Hello, welcome to Catalyst. Like most city dwellers, I don't give a second thought to having a ready supply of tap water every time I go into the kitchen. But with rainfall drying up and our dams getting alarmingly low, water companies are finding it more and more difficult to source our rainwater. In Perth, they're using underground water, aquifers, to provide, in fact, the majority of their drinking water. While in Sydney, they're planning to also tap their groundwater reserves. But just how much water is down there and is using it sustainable? Marianne de Macy goes to ground in search of answers.
When it comes to water these days, every drop counts. Australia is now the third largest per capita user of water in the world. In the grip of a drought and declining rainfall, new dams and water trading schemes aren't effective long-term solutions. And while our farmers feel the full brunt of the drought, now even our cities are running dry. With everyone searching for a radical solution, scientists are drilling underground to find water.
Around the world, about 97% of our drinkable water supplies are groundwater. They're not water from dams or water from rivers.
Australia's lagging behind in its use of groundwater in many respects. Most of the water supply in Germany is groundwater. Around London, something like 70 to 75% of water used is groundwater. And also in the US, about 30 to 40% of all water used for domestic consumption in the US is from groundwater. So here in Australia, it would be less than 10%.
Some Australian capital cities have reserves of water underground called aquifers. Perth has the largest source of groundwater. Rainfall seeps through the ground and becomes stored in the thick layer of sand. Water is then filtered through the small spaces between the sand granules, and clean water can be accessed through bores in the ground.
We actually have plenty of groundwater. The issue is how do we manage that groundwater?
Dr. Rick Evans is an expert in geohydrology.
Okay, this actually shows what are the major groundwater resources of Australia. This is the Great Artesian Basin here, which is a huge aquifer. This is the Murray Basin here. This is the Perth Basin over here. We haven't recognised that it is a finite resource which has to be managed. We've just seen it as sort of being there and that we can just pump away as much as we like.
And this is exactly what has happened in Perth.
Perth residents still use more water than most other Australians. Perth's dams are now at 20% capacity. Lakes and wetlands around Perth are drying up.
Catalyst reported in 2002 that Perth was in a water crisis.
I think it's exceedingly dangerous to consider that the water available to Perth is infinite.
But since we ran this story, the situation has worsened. Now, 80% of Perth's water supply comes from aquifers underground. But overuse of this precious resource, coupled with declining rainfall, has had devastating consequences on the ecosystems. Only a few years ago, this lake used to have water up to about here, but today, there's no water in sight.
As the regional groundwater has started to drop because of our drying climate and the use of the groundwater, as you can see, it's just become a dry lake bed, and it's like this all the time.
Now, the situation is so urgent, the state's water strategy has set a target of recycling 20% of treated sewage by 2012.
So you can see we're getting small eucalyptus starting to grow up.
To meet this target, Dr. Simon Toes of the CSIRO is working around the clock. He plans to test the feasibility of replenishing the water supply in the aquifers by using treated sewage, a process called managed aquifer recharge.
We're taking the treated sewage effluent that we'd normally throw out to sea, and we bring it over to some infiltration galleries we've got set up over here.
They collect the treated sewage in a basin and it seeps into the ground.
So it's got all the contaminants, all the germs, all the chemicals in here, and we're seeing how well the natural system removes all that.
The water then travels through the sand where it's filtered and decontaminated. Only 10 metres away they can sample it.
If we can turn on the pump here, even though we've only come 10 metres, we already know that most of the phosphorus, that's one of the nutrients that causes all the algal problems, has been completely stripped out of the system. Virtually all the microorganisms are taken out by this distance, just by the natural processes of the aquifer here.
But while it looks clear, Simon has actually tested the water quality back at the lab.
So this is what we get when we sample the sewage effluent before it's recharged the aquifer. And those purple ones that you see there are all the E. coli. So they're a known pathogen and also an indicator of the quality of the water. So when we then take it, and this is where we've collected the water from about 20 metres away, and as you can see, for all the purple ones, the E. coli have been removed out of the water.
Other cities like Adelaide are already well underway to putting treated water into its aquifers. But Sydney plans to replenish its aquifers using stormwater.
There's a lot of water lost to stormwater flowing out to sea, mainly because it's just so difficult to actually capture it. It would be a great idea if we could actually try and capture more of that and put it into aquifers.
And this is exactly where they plan to put it.
Driving around the perimeter of Centennial Park right now.
Dr. Noel Merrick says the Botany Sands aquifer, spanning from Centennial Park to Botany Bay, is the city's most valuable source of water underground. Unfortunately, industrial pollution has rendered 1/3 of it useless for possibly the next 100 years. But the remaining 2/3 is relatively pristine.
This is the northernmost point of the Botany Sands aquifer, so we're surrounded.
If more stormwater is diverted into the Botany aquifer, it could double its contribution to Sydney's water supply. This is where the stormwater comes into Centennial Park. It runs into the ponds and then percolates through the ground. The water doesn't look fit for drinking now, but it becomes decontaminated by a sophisticated yet natural filtration process underground.
A lot of the contaminants that are carried off the roads, for example, that come into the pond, will settle at the bottom of the pond in the silt. But the water that infiltrates into the aquifer will be pretty clean, and the sand that forms the aquifer will provide an ongoing level of filtration.
Amazingly, it takes about 10 years for the water to percolate through the park before it comes out the other end, ready to drink. And while we're all brave enough to do the taste test, the water still isn't approved for public use. On the whole, even if stormwater could double the amount of groundwater available, it would still only contribute 4% to Sydney's water supply.
I don't think it'll solve our water problem, but it will be part of the answer.
So whether it be groundwater, desalination or new dams, any radical solution for Australia's water problems will take time.
We've been used to seeing it as an infinite resource which we can just turn on a tap or pump water out of a bore and it's just there. In reality, that's not the way the rest of the world operates. We need to have a culture change.